The loudest sound in that mansion was the ticking of the grandfather clock in the living room. A relentless, almost cruel tick-tock that marked the absence of laughter, conversation, life. Support the channel by subscribing and leaving a like. Now, let's dive into our story. Alexander Price, 38, sat at the edge of his bed wearing the same shirt he had for 2 days. His beard was unshaven, his gaze lost in the Persian rug where he used to play with his daughter. In recent months, all he managed to do was exist. Nothing more. Since the car accident that claimed the life of Lauren, his wife, he had become a shell of a man. Physically present, emotionally shut down. His only reason to get out of bed each morning was Lily, his 2-year-old daughter. But even caring for her was slowly slipping through the cracks of his grief. The playroom was dusty. The last nanny had quit, saying she couldn't handle the heaviness in the house. And she wasn't wrong. That's when Eleanor, the family's longtime housekeeper, approached him with a suggestion. I know someone. Her name is Grace Miller. She's young, but her heart is in the right place. And Lily needs that more than experience right now. Alexander gave a slight nod. He didn't even ask who she was. He was too tired to deal with interviews. He just trusted. And for a man that broken, that was already something. 2 days later, Grace arrived, with a worn bag slung over her shoulder, brown hair tied up in a simple bun, and the look of someone who, even without fully understanding, knew she was stepping into something fragile. She was greeted by Eleanor and led into the living room, where Lily was asleep on the couch, hugging a stuffed animal. Alexander appeared at the top of the staircase, tall, well-dressed, yet visibly drained. He observed in silence. Grace didn't try to make small talk. She simply knelt down gently, stroked Lily's hair, and whispered, "Hi, sweet girl. I'm Grace. Want to play with me when you wake up?" Alexander turned his eyes away. It disarmed him more than it should have. There was no formal interview, no questions about qualifications, no salary discussed. There was something about her, a quiet calm, that just fit. That night, for the first time in weeks, Lily fell asleep without crying. And for the first time since the funeral, Alexander looked out his bedroom window and whispered, "Whatever this is, thank you, Lord." But the pain didn't vanish. Grief was still a house guest with a made bed. And what he didn't know was that this young nanny wasn't just a temporary relief. She was the beginning of something he'd never have dared to plan. A new beginning, disguised as routine. Grace had always believed that some children feel more than they speak. And when she met Lily, that belief was confirmed. The little girl had her mother's eyes. Photos around the house made that clear, but her gaze carried a depth far beyond her 2 years, as if she bore too much longing for such a small body. In the first few days, Grace kept an emotional distance, not out of coldness, but out of respect. She knew she was walking into a wounded home. Every corner of the mansion seemed to echo sadness. Half-open doors, forgotten toys, neatly folded clothes that no one wore anymore. But Lily was a breath of life. She didn't speak much, but she noticed everything. And when she sensed Grace's presence, something shifted. Subtly, she began to follow her around the house, held her hand tightly during bath time, and refused to sleep unless Grace was nearby. Eleanor, the housekeeper, noticed first. "She trusts you. That hasn't happened since Lauren passed." Grace just smiled softly. Inside, she was struggling not to get too close. She knew that bonding with a child like Lily could either heal or completely break her. Alexander, meanwhile, kept his distance. He spent his mornings locked in his office, afternoons in virtual meetings, and evenings alone in the library. Grace saw him only from afar, always impeccably dressed, always silent. But slowly, she began to notice the small things. How he stood up every time Lily cried, even if he didn't have the strength to go to her. How he let his coffee go cold, eyes lost in news he didn't read. How he still wore his wedding ring. One night, Lily woke up with a fever. She trembled, whimpering softly. Grace picked her up, sat in the nursery's rocking chair, and began to hum a lullaby, one her grandmother used to sing to her when she was a child. Alexander appeared at the doorway. The scene froze him. Lily, so fragile, asleep again in the arms of a woman he barely knew, yet who now seemed like an essential part of their home. The softness in Grace's voice, her tired but steady gaze, the way she held his daughter, something about it all struck him in a way he couldn't explain. "Is she okay?" he asked, his voice hoarse from hours of silence. Grace looked at him, not with pity, but with quiet empathy. She just needed someone here. Alexander nodded, unable to meet her eyes for long. Then, before leaving the room, he whispered almost inaudibly, "Thank you for being here." She simply smiled. But inside, something stirred. It wasn't affection. Not yet. It was recognition, as if she'd finally found a place where her care made a difference. The next morning, Lily ran into the living room holding a crayon drawing. It was a simple sketch, 3 people holding hands. Her, Grace, and Alexander. Grace looked at the drawing, then at the child, and finally at the man standing motionless in the doorway. They didn't know it yet, but something was already blooming. Something unexpected, and absolutely real. Grace used to say that the deepest scars are the ones no one sees. And in that house, almost everything was invisible. The walls gleamed with cleanliness. The high-end furniture looked untouched. But there was something in the air, a heavy grief, like a fog that never fully lifts. Without meaning to, Grace began rearranging the small details. She replaced Lily's bedsheets with softer tones, planted lavender on the windowsill, and little by little, took the toys out of the closet and placed them back on the living room rug. She wasn't trying to erase Lauren. She was trying to bring life back to what remained. Alexander noticed it all. Silently, he watched this woman return color to a place that had turned gray the day of the funeral. And yet, it unsettled him. It scared him. One night, walking past the living room, he saw Grace sitting with Lily in her lap, reading a children's book. The little girl was smiling. It had been months since he had seen that smile. It hit him like a punch to the chest. Later that same night, as he washed his face in the bathroom, Alexander stared into the mirror, angered. "Are you already forgetting?" he whispered to himself. But it wasn't forgetfulness. It was the beginning of a reconstruction, one he didn't know if he was ready to allow. A few days later, Lily fell ill again. This time, more seriously. High fever, labored breathing, constant crying. Alexander left an important meeting halfway to rush home. When he entered the room, he found Grace holding the girl in her arms, her forehead damp with sweat, her hair clinging to her skin. She looked at him, distressed. "We need to take her to the hospital now." Without hesitation, he scooped Lily into his arms and ran to the the emergency room. The wait was long. Lily slept, exhausted, in Grace's arms. Grace remained calm the entire time. Alexander did not. He paced back and forth, hands trembling, breathing heavy. I can't go through this again." The words slipped out. Grace looked at him with steady seriousness. "She's going to be okay, but you need to be here. With her. With yourself." Later, once Lily was stabilized and resting under observation, they drove home in silence. In that stillness, Alexander broke. "Lauren, she died like this. In a hospital. I couldn't do anything. Didn't even get to say goodbye. I just got the call, and it felt like the ground disappeared beneath me." Grace didn't answer right away. She gently touched his arm. "I lost my brother. He was just a kid, and I was the one watching him when it happened." He turned to her, surprised. It was drowning. I looked away for 3 minutes. 3 damn minutes. A single tear ran down her cheek. It wasn't for show. It was old pain. Real pain. In that moment, something shifted between them. It wasn't romance. Not it was recognition. Both of them knew what it meant to carry a weight the world couldn't see. And it was there, within those invisible scars, that their hearts first began to move closer. Alexander became more present after Lily's health scare. Not that he had become open. He was still reserved, still guarded. But now he quietly watched the bedtime stories from the doorway, sat at the breakfast table, and sometimes, even, smiled. Grace noticed. She could feel his gaze during random moments. When she brushed Lily's hair, when she laughed at the little girl's made-up words, or when she simply stood by the window, watching the rain slide down the glass. But with closeness came fear and guilt. Alexander began to punish himself for feeling something for another woman. It felt like betrayal, like he was betraying Lauren, the woman who stood by his side for 12 years, the mother of his child, the woman who died while he was in a meeting, helpless to stop it. He started pulling away. Subtly at first, he stopped meeting Grace's eyes. Then more deliberately, he declined dinners, avoided moments where they might be alone. Grace felt the chill, But she didn't push. She'd seen this before. People retreating when they feel something real. People who pull away to avoid facing what's stirring inside them. But what hurt was Lily. The little girl noticed her father's absence. She asked why he no longer read stories, why he didn't eat dinner with them, why he always disappeared before she fell asleep. Grace tried to soften it. He's just busy, sweetheart. But he loves you very much, okay? And it was true. Alexander loved his daughter, but he was caught in a battle within himself, a battle he didn't know how to win. One night, hearing laughter from the living room, Grace and Lily having a pretend picnic, he came downstairs and stopped in the stairwell. Lily's laughter, Grace's lightness, and then the sound of something breaking inside him. He walked into the kitchen, breathing heavily, and slammed the cabinet door. Eleanor, who was washing dishes, jumped. "You need to stop fighting this, Alex." He turned toward her, frustrated. "Fighting what? I'm a widower, Eleanor. I have a 2-year-old daughter. You expect me to just forget?" She stared at him, unflinching. "No one's asking you to forget. But Lauren is gone. And if you keep letting guilt run your life, you're going to lose what's still here." Alexander dropped his head. His hands trembled. "What if I hurt Grace? What if this is just loneliness? What if I can't love again without hating myself for it?" Eleanor stepped closer. "Then ask yourself this, Alex. What's worse, the fear of loving again, or the certainty of staying emotionally dead?" That night, Alexander didn't sleep. He wandered through the house like a ghost, passing old photos, memories locked in frames. Eventually, he stopped at Lily's door. Grace was sitting beside the crib, asleep, her head resting on her arm, a strand of hair falling loose from her bun. She didn't hear him approach, but before returning to the hallway, he whispered, "Forgive me for not knowing how to feel this the right way." And then he took the first step. The next morning, he called a therapist, because to love again takes courage, but to heal takes humility. The news of Rachel's visit fell like a silent thunderclap. Alexander didn't mention it. Grace knew the moment she heard that firm, elegant voice echo through the entrance hall. "This house smells like lavender. Since when?" Rachel Price, Alexander's older sister, a renowned attorney, had always been protective of her brother. And after Lauren's death, that protectiveness turned into constant watchfulness. She didn't visit often, but when she did, everything stopped. Her voice carried authority, her gaze a scalpel. Grace greeted her politely. Rachel studied her with the sharp eyes of someone already forming a judgment. "You're the new nanny?" "Yes, Grace Miller." "How old are you, Grace?" 26. That was it. A single hum that cut deeper than 100 words to in the following days. Rachel became an uncomfortable shadow in the house. She observed Grace like a detective. She was overly sweet to Lily, almost too affectionate, as if trying to prove the child didn't need a nanny. One evening, as Grace walked into the kitchen to grab a glass of water, she found Rachel waiting for her. "Can I ask you something bluntly?" Grace nodded. "What exactly do you want from my brother?" The air felt like it froze. "With all due respect, Miss Price, I don't want anything. I'm just here to care for Lily." Rachel didn't bother hiding her sarcasm. "Of course. And falling for the grieving rich widower was just a happy accident, I suppose." Grace took a deep breath, holding herself together. "I know how it may look, but that's not what this is." "Then tell me, Grace, do you have any idea how much he's been through? What he's lost? You never knew Lauren. She was the best thing that ever happened to him. And you, I'm sorry, but you're not in the same league." That last sentence cut deeper than any other. Grace, steady, replied, "His pain. I see it in his eyes. And I've never tried to replace her. I've just been here when no one else wanted to be." Rachel stared at her for a long moment, as if something inside her wanted to soften, but didn't. The next morning, Grace began to pack. Alexander came home to find her at the front door, eyes swollen, heart shattered. "What's going on?" She simply handed him an envelope. "My notice. I don't want to cause trouble. Lily's going to be okay." "Grace, no. It's better this way. Your sister's right. I don't belong in this world. And maybe I've confused things." Alexander stood in silence for a moment, then suddenly tore the envelope into 4 pieces in front of her. "You're not going anywhere. Because I'm in love with you." Grace froze. And what if it's just loneliness, Alexander? What if you're just trying to fill a void? I asked myself that every day. But after last night, after seeing you asleep beside my daughter, holding her with such care, with so much love, I knew. He stepped closer and gently took her hand. You didn't save me, Grace, but you reminded me that I can still be saved. Rachel watched from the doorway. She left that same day, but not without leaving a letter in her brother's study that I in it. Unexpected revelations about his marriage to Lauren, the arguments he never noticed, the silent depression she had hidden, the desire for divorce she never had the courage to confess. Lauren hadn't been perfect, and Alexander had never truly known all of her. That it was like opening his eyes for the first time. The pain didn't vanish, but for the first time, he could accept. Maybe loving again wasn't betrayal. Maybe it was simply moving forward. Time felt different in those days. Slower, heavier with meaning. Grace was still in the house. Alexander had asked her to stay at least until things settled down. But everyone knew that request held something deeper. He didn't want to lose her. And Lily simply couldn't fall asleep anymore without hearing Grace's soft voice whispering a bedtime story at her crib. Still, tension lingered in the air. Grace avoided being alone with Alexander. Her touch had become cautious, as if afraid of crossing an invisible line. Even though their feelings had been confessed, the weight of reality was still too much to embrace without fear. On a quiet Sunday afternoon, while Lily was napping, Grace went out to the garden. She had been planting flowers since the day she arrived. It was her silent therapy. Alexander found her there, kneeling in the soil, hands covered in dirt, her face weary. This garden hasn't had this much life since Lauren passed. Grace looked up, serious. And you? Is there life inside you, Alex? Or are you still trying to hold the pieces together? He sat beside her, arms crossed. Some days, I still wake up expecting her to be there, hoping all of this was just a bad dream. That's normal. And then some days, I look at you, and I feel alive. And then, I feel like a monster because of it. Grace turned her gaze away. I don't want to be the woman who came in when the door was still half open. You didn't come in. You were sent. Silence followed. Only the wind rustling through the leaves filled the space. That's when Lily appeared at the door, holding a scribbled piece of paper. On it, 3 figures holding hands. The same drawing as before, but this time with a new detail, a heart drawn in the middle figure, Grace. She ran toward them. Mommy. The word came out soft, innocent, but echoed like thunder. Grace froze. Her eyes welled with tears. So did Alexander's. He scooped his daughter into his arms and held her tightly, then looked at Grace with a mix of awe and affirmation. She chose you. Grace stood still in shock. Alex, I don't know if I can. What if this is God telling us it's time to rebuild? Grace stayed silent for several long seconds. Then, with a trembling voice, she said, I'm scared. Scared I won't be enough. Scared I can't hold all of this together. Alexander reached for her hand. We don't have to be perfect. We just have to be real. And that evening, in a garden blooming with new life, under the laughter of a child and the weight of 2 scarred hearts, the very thing they feared most and longed for the most happened. They kissed. A slow, tender kiss, like a thank you more than a desire, like a recognition that in each other they had found the possibility of beginning again. It was no longer a story of grief. It was a story of rebuilding. And the first brick had been laid. With courage, Pergunter AO ChatGPT. A year had passed. The house that was once cold and silent now breathed. And not just because of the blooming flowers in the garden, but because it finally felt like a home again. Spring brought more than just new colors. It marked a new season. For all 3 of them, Grace now lived there. Not as an employee, not as a guest, but as part of the family. And even though the word stepmother carried a weight she was afraid of, Lily never saw her that way to Tio, the little girl. Grace was simply Mom, and Alexander, still marked by the shadows of the past, had become a different man. More present, more grounded, more human. The pain of losing Lauren hadn't disappeared, but it had become part of his story, no longer the end of it. The morning of the wedding arrived with clear skies. Nothing grand, just a small altar in the garden where it had all begun. The guest list was short. Eleanor wept like a mother. Rachel, to everyone's surprise, was there, quiet, standing off to the side, eyes filled with tears. During the vows, Alexander held Grace's hands tightly. You found me at rock bottom. You didn't try to rescue me. You simply stayed until I had the strength to rise. You taught me that loving again isn't betrayal. It's honoring the life that's still here. And for that, I promise to love you not with urgency, but with presence. Grace took a deep breath before speaking. For a long time, I believed my life would always be marked by loss. My brother, my dreams, my peace. But the Lord showed me that where there is pain, there can still be new beginnings. You and Lily are not a reward. You're a calling, and I promise to answer it with love every single day. Lily ran into the middle of the ceremony, wearing a little white dress and with tiny fingers stained with paint. She had made a drawing for Mommy and Daddy. Everyone laughed, even Alexander, an honest, joyful laugh. That night, the three of them sat out in the garden, looking up at the stars. Grace rested her head on Alexander's shoulder. Lily slept in her lap, that he looked at his wife and whispered, "Do you think Lauren would approve of us?" Grace glanced up at the sky and smiled. "I think so. Because even though she's gone, she gave the world Lily. And it was because of Lily that we found each other." Alexander blinked back tears. "You gave me a second chance." Grace looked at him with quiet tenderness. "No, love did. I was just the garden where it bloomed again." If this story touched your heart, leave a comment and tell us which moment moved you the most. Like the video so more people can find this message. Share it with someone who needs to believe in new beginnings. And subscribe to the channel for more stories that heal, inspire, and prove that love always finds a way.